All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, we are back taking a look at the tropics. Tonight is Saturday, July 3rd, 2021, and this is your latest update on now tropical Storm Elsa, located in the central Caribbean and moving generally towards Cuba and potentially the southeast United States in the next couple days. So, last time we talked, Elsa was a hurricane and she was in the Windward Islands. Maximum sustained winds were around 85 miles an hour. Since the storm has continued to race off to the west and is now in very close proximity to the southern peninsula of Haiti, the Tiburon Peninsula, and maximum sustained winds have come down to about 70 miles an hour as of the 5 p.m. update from the National Hurricane Center. We'll go ahead and get to their forecast cone. The biggest updates we have right now is that tropical storm watches are now in effect for parts of the United States. That is pretty much the Keys, Florida Keys. That is from Craig Key westward to the Dry Tortugas. Tropical storm watches have been extended more into Cuba. Tropical storm warnings, obviously, for much of Cuba, most of Jamaica, where Elsa's wrath will be next felt. And we will watch her work through parts of Jamaica and Cuba on Sunday. She'll be crossing Cuba on Monday as she begins to slow down. She'll approach Florida on Tuesday and should recurve over the southeast United States and begin to accelerate again Wednesday into Thursday. That's kind of the rough idea of what we're looking at. So, what are the big changes with Elsa today? Well, we're watching that the storm is really trying to get itself organized, but it's having a very hard time. One of the things, the best way to illustrate this is that the core of the storm is partially exposed, or has been exposed throughout much of today. I want you to focus on the satellite imagery. This is the center of the storm right here, and the winds out of the north and then eventually the east are this is the basically half of the storm is exposed. The other half is obscured by heavier clouds. But this part of the storm, I want you to watch this part as I, go ahead and move out on the satellite here. You can see the swirl right here where you have this part of the storm that's just completely exposed. And that's been the wind shear. There's been some low to mid-level wind shear that's been pushing on Elsa. And Elsa's um, contrasting fast forward speed has really kind of made that light wind shear a lot worse. It's like if there's a 10-mile-an-hour wind and you drive into the headwind, it's a lot worse than moving with the wind. Because up until she got to the Windward Islands, all her shear was along with the storm, so it wasn't really a big of a deal. But then when she got to the eastern, the central Caribbean, there was this northwest wind from a high pressure center over here that was kind of pushing down, and driving into it caused her some significant problems. Mainly, it was tilting the vortex. And what it's doing is it's blowing all these thunderstorms off back here. So instead of her center being over here, where if you looked at this, you would think, oh, this is probably where the center is and the deepest, thunderstorms. Actually, the mid-level center is somewhere over here and the low-level center is over here. So you kind of have this, misalignment of the storm because of that wind shear, if that makes some sense. But you can see on this satellite image of the last couple hours, we have noticed maybe a slight strengthening is starting to happen. We have this thunderstorms beginning to burst up, and you see this burst here is wrapping around those low-level winds and trying to make it around the center of the storm. So we'll see if that works out for her. Other than that, the big observation really is that Haiti is not going to be a big impact to her. It's going to, cause some disruption. It definitely has throughout today. You have a lot of rain bands over the island, and even this little peninsula. I said in the previous video that this wasn't a big deal, but I was actually looking at the topography of Haiti. It is a bigger deal. Even if she would have tracked this center, which is again down here, if this would have been about 15, 20 miles northward and been over the southern peninsula, that would have even caused some significant disruption. But it appears that Elsa is just going to skirt south of Haiti, which means that one of our check marks of is one of these islands going to significantly weaken her. So far, we can say Haiti, no. So now it goes to Jamaica and it goes to Cuba. Well, Jamaica is not going to be a big player in this. There's pretty much no way she's going to come down and go over Jamaica. She's pretty much going to stay on some sort of heading in this kind of north and west motion. So we're not going to have Jamaica being a big impact. But what about Cuba? Well, that is the big story, the big thing we're tracking. We're going to go ahead and zoom in your 5-day forecast to 3 days to kind of show you a little bit better here. For Hurricane Center forecast cone, again, this cone shows anywhere the center could really be within the next couple days. So, you see right here the black line showing her just skirting south of Haiti. Okay, check, makes sense. The track within the next about 24 to 36 hours really becomes a big deal here. If you take the storm and you ride the northern edge of this cone and you run her through Cuba, see how the trajectory is that you have her pretty much over land almost the entire way because how Cuba's oriented and kind of a southeast and northwest sort of orientation, and how, if you follow through the cone, she's going to be moving through this cone. So if she's on the northern edge of the cone, that's a lot of time. I mean, that's a good solid 10 or 12, 14 or so hours over land. And Eastern Cuba is pretty rugged too. It's not, doesn't have gigantic mountain peaks, but it's rugged terrain. It's not flat. It's not like crossing South Florida where it's just basically water anyway. This is actually some pretty rugged terrain, and that will significantly disrupt and unsettle the vortex of the storm. Conversely, if Elsa was to, say, travel the southern part of this, that's a little bit of a different story. You're talking about a storm that may have another 10, 14 or so hours of strengthening possibilities, and western Cuba is not nearly as mountainous as eastern Cuba is when you talk about Havana. And also notice if she rides around the south side, you're over water, 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 land for just a second, and water. So the difference in this within the same forecast cone is pretty much a really big deal. The other big deal about this is Elsa will be enjoying some pretty nice upper level winds around this time. The GFS model at this time, we're showing you a forecast for early on Monday, late on Sunday. Has her kind of splitting the middle, which is very possible, where she's not really technically overland, but she's also not overland, which is probably the most likely outcome. But just for illustration purposes, she'll be under a beautiful anticyclone aloft. This is high upper level winds. This is 200 millibar winds. These winds are way up in the top of the atmosphere. But it illustrates that her upper level winds, which have been not so great, they've been pushing her along. That headwind we were talking about, our tailwind, now switches to an exhaust mechanism. Upper level winds in this pattern will exhaust a hurricane in the good way, like your car's exhaust. It pulls the used air out of the engine and gets it out, so fresh air can come in. Kind of the same thing with a storm. All the air in a storm rises, and then when it gets to the top of the storm, it has to move out. So this is the water, and this is the surface. Air, generally, the storm will rise, and it'll rise, and then it wants to leave at the top. So if you have an upper level high pressure that's pushing that air out and away from the storm, it allows it to breathe and allows more air to rise. And that's kind of what Elsa may be going into. Now, if she's over Cuba, it's not really going to matter. She's going to be over land. It's going to disrupt the bottom of the storm, and it's going to tear the frame out, and it's not going to be good news for Elsa. But if she's over this warmer water, that's a different story. We also have, not only do we have warm water all over the place here, but we have deep warm water south of Cuba. So if she's even just 15, 20, 25 miles offshore, 30 miles offshore, which is well within the cone of error in the next about 24 or 38 out or 36 hours, it could be a big deal. So that's what we're watching this afternoon. She's not really going to mess with Haiti too terribly much. It's some weather and whatnot, but it didn't really outright wreck the storm. But she's also struggling some. Can Elsa kind of finish her struggles and catch up and get her vortex realigned, which she's not doing right now, but she has some time? And then does she go over land or does she go over water? And if she goes over land, she'll be a pretty rough looking storm when she gets into the eastern Gulf of Mexico and the Florida Straits. Probably won't be too much of a big threat. It'll mostly be a rainmaker with some wind for the western Florida coastline. If she takes a bit more of a southerly jog, can stay over that warm water and just grazes Cuba, the potential for a strong tropical storm to a hurricane is still on the table. The Hurricane Center is not forecasting a hurricane right now explicitly, but they do have the hurricane watches up still for parts of Cuba, which tells you that there is some uncertainty. And the fact that, again, she's at 70 to 75 miles an hour, she's on the cusp of category 1 hurricane or strong tropical storm. So sometimes you're on those 5 or 10 mile an hour like cutoffs where, okay, it's not really much of a difference in the storm. But so I'd say for Western Florida, the potential for a hurricane still on the table tonight. But for now, she is kind of struggling. And it looks like, if she kind of splits the middle, then she'll probably about hold intensity. She'll probably stay about 60, 70, 75 mile an hour. She'll weaken some leaving Cuba, and she'll probably be a 50, 55 mile an hour tropical storm here. She'll probably recover a little bit, and she'll landfall as a somewhat disrupted, disorganized tropical storm where the right side of the storm is pretty rough. The left side of the storm, not so much. But if she stays south of Cuba, could be worse. So let's go ahead and look at some forecast stuff here. Computer models starting to agree better. This is why we kind of had higher confidence today that she's not turning and going offshore completely. She's not going to the central Gulf of Mexico. So Florida or Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, you're probably good. You're going to be on the drier side of the storm. You'll get some rain from this, but she'll also probably funnel down some drier air that's kind of sitting over the central United States, and it probably won't be much to it for you guys. And she's probably not going so far to the east that Florida is going to miss this completely. So what do we shift to as far as impacts? Well, rain. Rain's going to be the big thing. Rain is coming regardless. I mean, there is no way that Florida is not going to get much of rain from this at this point. Right now, the Weather Prediction Center showing a vast swath of the Florida Peninsula getting 2 to 4 inches of rain, or up in here in northern and central Florida and the western part of Florida, maybe closer to 3 to 6 inches of rain. And tropical storms, you can get almost double what the high end totals are. So if I say there's 2 to 4 inches of rain forecast, you could probably get up to 8 or even a little bit more than that if you just happen to be where those tropical rain bands are continuing to just ride. And this is the total rainfall between now and Thursday. So we also have the stalled cold front sitting over the Gulf Coast in northern Florida. That's producing rain itself. That's before Elsa even gets there. And then as Elsa comes up, you have her pulling all this deep tropical moisture along with her, and especially on the right side of the circulation. And that is where we're going to expect heavy rain, and that will be in the forecast. And I do think these totals do come up. I think you'll see, 4 to 6 inches will kind of become the norm for a lot of folks. Maybe in southeast Florida, 2 to 4 is probably still more likely since you're kind of going to be on the, decent ways away. And then maybe the Florida Peninsula, or I'm sorry, the Panhandle out to the west, probably going to see those totals stay about where they are. But Central Florida, Northern Florida, Western Florida, Peninsula, yeah, you're going to see a lot of rain from this, no doubt about it, between now and Thursday. Winds really are too hard to really give you a great call right now. The GFS model shows the storm significantly weaker. So if I go ahead and just show you the wind swath forecast, this is for gusts, 50 to 60 miles an hour along the West Florida coast where her center is going to come up and likely make landfall somewhere. 20 to 30 miles an hour from much of the East Coast and Central Florida, tropical depression, some tropical storm force gusts. If she's a little bit weaker, then that's probably very likely. If she's on the stronger side or if she is a hurricane on approach, then all these numbers go up 15, 20 miles an hour. So it's a little too early to determine wind impacts. We really have to see how she gets through Hispaniola, Cuba, Jamaica, that area. Now, we already talked about that scenario. So we'll see how that plays out. But I would say, again, right now, Florida, you're going to get something. That's pretty much a given. You're going to get a lot of rain. Wind impacts still remain to be seen, and surge impacts still remain to be seen. Again, if Elsa is a pretty strong tropical storm to a hurricane coming up from Cuba, we were talking about significant serious storm surge for the west coast of Florida. It's a very vulnerable area. And we're talking about, tropical storm force winds for a large portion of the Florida Peninsula and hurricane force winds for some of it. And we're talking about much less in terms of wind if Elsa is tore up by Cuba and comes through and pukes into the Florida Strait as a much weaker storm. Then we're just talking about a lot of rain. So that's what I got for today, guys. We will probably not have another video tonight. I'll see, maybe there's a quick update, but I would expect tropical storm watches to go up for much of the South Florida coastline, both Southwest, Southeast Florida. That'll include Miami, Punta Gorda, Naples, Fort Myers, all the way up to maybe even Tampa or Clearwater, with those tropical storm force impacts likely as early as Tuesday night. So like late tonight on Saturday night wouldn't be a bad time for the Hurricane Center to go out and start pushing those, and you'll see those gradually move up the coast as the days go on. So be ready for that. And it looks like Tuesday into Wednesday really is going to be where the worst of the weather is for the Florida Peninsula. Early to midday Tuesday for South Florida, Tuesday night to early Wednesday for North Florida. Rough ideas, and then a lot more rain likely on its way for much of the Carolinas and southeast Georgia, but her ultimate track, whether she's offshore or onshore, will determine you guys' forecast. We'll get you guys as the days go on and we get closer to this event. So that's what I got for you today, guys. As always, thanks for watching and have a good one.